In this tutorial, I'll be discussing the basic anatomy of joints. Joints are a union between two or more bones, and we find them throughout our entire body. They permit movement, and they also help to bind our bones together. In this anterior view of the hand, we can see many joints, and I'll just point out a few of them. Here we have the first metacarpal, which articulates with the proximal phalange of the first digit, and this is a union between two bones. Again, here's another example between the same phalange that is highlighted, the proximal phalange of the first digit, which articulates with the distal phalange of the first digit. And again, this is another example of a joint where two bones articulate with one another. If we move more proximally, we can see the radiocarpal joint, or our wrist joint. Here we have the radius, which articulates with the scaphoid bone, and also the lunate bone. And this is an example of a joint which involves the articulation of more than just two bones. You can see from this picture that wherever bones meet other bones, this is where we find joints. And particularly within the hand, there's many joints. And if you look at your own hand or move your own hand around, you can see that lots of movement is permitted within the hand because of these joints that are present. It's also important to note that many joints throughout our body actually only allow for a little bit of movement, and there's actually some joints that allow for no movement at all. All joints in the body can be classified in two different ways. They can be classified based on their function and also by their structure. When we classify joints based on their structure, we're classifying them based on the type of movement that is permitted at that particular joint. And when we're classifying joints based on their structure, we're typically describing what type of tissue actually helps to hold those joints together and whether there is a joint cavity present. Next, I'll provide you with some examples of functional and also structural joints. In this lateral view of the skull, we can see that there are many bones that articulate with one another to create joints. And these particular joints are called sutures. The sutures are an example of an immobile joint, or a joint that doesn't move. So if you think about your skull, it doesn't provide movement. And we classify these functionally as synostotic joints. If we classify these sutures based on their structure, there's actually fibrous tissue which helps to hold these joints together. Therefore, the sutures can be classified both by their function and also by their structure. Just anterior to your ear, we have the temporomandibular joint. And this particular joint is the joint that is involved in moving our jaw when we're chewing. And it's an example of a joint that we can classify as a diathoracic joint because it allows for lots of movement. So if you think about your jaw, you open and close your mouth, this joint is going to move. And if we classify it based on its structure, it's called a synovial joint because it has a joint capsule. Here I've just highlighted the joint capsule, and what makes synovial joints unique is that they have a fluid-filled capsule. In a separate tutorial, I'll discuss synovial joints in a little bit more detail. The last type of joint that I'll provide an example for are joints that are in between immobile and freely movable joints, and these are joints called amphithoracic joints. They allow for a little bit of movement or slight movement. And an example of one is in between the first costal cartilage, which is right here where my arrow is, connecting to the sternum, or the manubrium of the sternum. This is called the sternocostal joint, and as I mentioned before, it's a joint that allows for a little bit of movement, so it's considered an amphithoracic joint. And based on the type of tissue that holds it together, here we have cartilage connecting to the bone, so this is considered a cartilaginous joint. As I mentioned previously, all joints in the body can be classified based on their function and also based on their structure. As we go through the joints in the body, we'll discuss both of these.